didn't get jobs, who said it was the best interview I never got. And it felt like, if I really want to work for these people, if they care about those kind of conversations. So it also attracts people who want to work in that way. Now the downside is what you do when you've got a half-absent team. But I still think it's better to ask the questions to know, because particularly if you've got a half-absent team, you want to know what resourcefulness, moral and emotional resourcefulness a candidate might bring. The last thing is that some of the more trained people score much worse on this, for the reason that I think actually your question was hinting at, which is they have had their emotions socialized out of them through years of working in cold bureaucracies. Some of the most exciting candidates are the untrained, raw, off the streets, who bring a humane, gutsy kind of in-touchness with what it is to be human. And particularly in the residential sector, that actually those are the people we're going to trust having intimate care. Much more than people, frankly, I don't think that the qualifications tell us an awful lot about close care these days. Maybe some courses do, but the majority don't. So, you know, I'm saying I think there's an emerging really good practice. You could write to the NSPCC in the northern region and ask them about the protocol. They're now doing a 3-year longitudinal research to go back to the candidates that were appointed to see, were these good workers? Did they survive all the storms? Did they prove to be robust? Finally, I think there are some situations where people just get in under the radar screen, and they prove to be disastrous. Why? Because the very thing that allows people to talk openly, which is a containing, safe interview, is the very thing they won't have when the storm breaks. The big question is how you create enough storm in the recruitment process to test the reality. And this isn't because people are lying, this is not this. It's that they honestly answered the question, and the more containing the interview is, the more reflective these people are. And of course that's not what happens when the what's it hits the fan, is it? Because context is the marker for behaviour. So I think we've got some tools up our sleeve, and I think we should progress it. Even changing one interview question. I had a lovely story. A youth justice manager said they wanted to know how people worked in groups. So they asked this guy, how do you work in groups? And he gave it. Anyway, they had this real simple task. They gave them some dried spaghetti and an egg as a group of candidates. And the group of candidates had to get together and make the dried spaghetti into a cradle that held the egg. And this guy, who'd given it large about his cooperative and collaborative potential, just spent 10 minutes watching everybody else. Frankly, even if we did that, that would be better than some of our current interviewing, which is so transparently, and so it's obvious what the socially desirable answer is. Just something that puts people under a degree of social stress, which is what the attachment interview does. We were talking about attachment. That's what the AI does.
How does intergenerational transmission work in relation to if you can't get workers now to experience, like you're talking about attachment and the skills that parents come, when workers haven't got those skills, how do they teach another generation? How do you support that in an organisation?
You want a lot for your money, don't you? First question, okay, there are two separate strands to the question. The first question was, how does peer support buffer? How does peer support buffer and enable us to stay emotionally fluent? The general answer is the two big things that research reports is in terms of buffering for stress is peer support and supervisory support. I think we need both, because peer support without supervisory support can lead us to kind of pull up the lager wagons and it's us against the world, and some of that becomes actually quite dysfunctional. So I think the second thing is the nurses for years had clinical supervision as a peer system. They have largely, particularly in relation to more risk areas, have come to feel that that is not robust enough, because in the end what happens is I scratch your back, you scratch mine, and we're not actually able to be sufficiently different to be useful to each other. Now the second question is a more complex question for me about how do we get one generation of workers to pass on sets of skills to another. What is very interesting is how whatever's in the water gets passed on, doesn't it? You know, when teams have been really dysfunctional, you have that set process. Every single person in that team can go, and the team carries on being dysfunctional. In other words, somehow intergenerational transmission is happening, whether we like it or not. My view is the vast majority of significant learning is unconscious. We don't know it's happening. And therefore it's the modelling, it's not the cognitive intellect. We do need a good scholastic base, please don't get me wrong. But it is the modelling in situations of stress that is the most powerful transmitter of both the good bits and unfortunately the bad bits. Why? Because when we're under stress, the brain is hardwired to take notice. So how you, my supervisor, my colleague, respond when I'm feeling really anxious about a case, I will remember that response because it occurred during duress. And if that response is a helpful response, that will be hardwired into my neurological system.